The member for Fisher.
Well, thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. And the appropriation debate is one of those golden opportunities that honourable members have to talk about issues of importance to their electorates. Today I want to raise the issue of the Asian honeybee, and members would have seen bee producers demonstrating in a very civilised and orderly way outside Parliament House to highlight the importance of the need to eradicate the Asian honeybee, which does threaten the honey industry in Australia. The presence of the bee was discerned some 5 years ago, and it's believed that the bees arrived in a hollow mast of a ship and were first found and identified in 2005 while the ship was docked and undergoing repairs in Cairns in tropical North Queensland. Another hive of the bees was found 2 years later in a drum in 2007, not far away from the first location. Asian bees are highly dominant, and the fear is that they will take over the habitats of local native bees and cause great damage to local bee populations, and Asian bees also carry disease. They're a hardy intruder, and attempts to eradicate them in other countries have not been successful. The beekeeping industry in Australia believes it can eradicate the problem in this country with the correct support and enough government funding. Beekeepers across Australia, including in my electorate of Fisher, and I've been discussing this matter with Dr Max Witten, a beekeeper, are greatly concerned because this menace has the potential to impact on their industry and affect not only honey production but also the natural and vital pollination of crops, other crops, fruits, vegetables and other plants. Bees are not only about honey. In fact, that is a relatively small part of what they do. They're a key part of the ecological network and play a vital role in the reproduction of plants everywhere. They need to be supported and assisted to ensure their population survives and thrives. Without our bees, our agriculture and horticultural industries would be much worse off and probably risk complete collapse, and much of the pollination of our native plants would not occur. A government funding program designed to address the issue has come to its end, unfortunately, and beekeepers and apiarists are campaigning for the government to launch a new campaign to continue the fight against this exotic intruder. Beekeepers are visiting Canberra, as I mentioned, this week to draw the attention to the issue, and have met with the Minister for Agriculture and also the Honourable Member for Calare. I recognise the concerns of those who are dependent on bees and also the difficulties in devising a program that will effectively address the issue of the Asian bee invasion. I would ask the government, through the Department of Agriculture, Fisheries and Forestry, to do all that it can to support ongoing attempts to eradicate the Asian bee from Australia. I now turn, Mr Deputy Speaker, to the plight of a cooperative in Maleny in the Sunshine Coast hinterland, and the shameful waste of money by the Queensland Labor Government's Health Department. A small yet thriving store, Maleny Street Co-op, on the Sunshine Coast was recently taken to court over the sale of unpasteurised milk, allegedly for human consumption. The raw milk was actually being sold as bath milk, known as Cleopatra's milk, and was clearly labelled as unsuitable for drinking. After a complaint from a resident, a plainclothes Queensland health officer entered the store and found that the unpasteurised milk was displayed in the same fridge as their organic pasteurised milk. The sale of unpasteurised or raw milk is prohibited under the Food Production Safety Act 2000 of Queensland. However, this milk was being sold for cosmetic or bathing purposes only. Queensland Health, and of course Queensland Health's computer system, saw lots of Queensland Health workers either not being paid, being underpaid or being overpaid, and this has gone on for months and months and months, have got their priorities wrong in their battle with this locally owned Sunshine Coast cooperative, and due to the investigation, the co-op has decided to no longer stock this product. And now, after 2 years, on the 22nd of October 2010, the magistrate in the prosecution launched by Queensland Health announced its decision, and unfortunately the Maleny Street Co-op was fined $2,500 plus $71.54 court fees payable within 4 months. It is outrageous, as the second Deputy Speaker points out. All this could have been avoided. The Maleny Street Co-op has always cooperated with all regulatory bodies and often invited officers to bring their staff up to date on current compliance and regulations. Therefore, had the opportunity been given, they would have been open to discuss the problems relating to unpasteurised milk instead of being dragged to court. The Queensland Health Department must have spent tens of thousands of dollars. Apparently in court appearances, Mr Deputy Speaker, there were 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 Queensland Health officers there to persecute the Mullaney Street Co-op. It would have been much more sensible for them to ask them not to sell the milk or to put it in a separate fridge, but it is disappointing that Queensland Health sought to be so vindictive at a time when they simply weren't able to pay their own health workers. Queensland has lots of health problems as a state. Our hospital system, of course, needs infusions of money, and indeed we find a situation where Queensland Health is prosecuting in a thuggish sort of Nazi-like way a local co-op. That is entirely unacceptable to the local community. It's unacceptable to the health workers who are not being paid, and frankly it's government gone mad. It's a waste of taxpayers' dollars. It is a criminal misuse, Mr Deputy Speaker, of the public money to persecute and prosecute a small local co-op that in fact does such a wonderful job of producing wholesome food and other healthy products for use by the local community. Frankly, if someone wants to buy Cleopatra's bath milk, or for that matter any other sort of raw milk for cosmetic purposes, that should be a matter for the purchaser. If that person, in my view, chooses to use it in another way, well then that is of course a matter for that person as well. I just think that it's wrong for the Queensland Health Department to act in the absolutely disgraceful way that it has in this particular situation, and I would like to call on the Queensland Health Minister to resign over this particular persecution of this local co-op. I'd also like to draw now, referring to milk still, Mr Deputy Speaker, to the attention of the House the plight of local Sunshine Coast milk producers who have been disadvantaged by the decision by Coles, and that decision has been followed by Woolworths, to in fact cut the price of milk to an unsustainable price, which indeed will make it very difficult for dairy farmers in the long term to continue to produce the wonderful product that is so healthy and so good for people to consume. I can understand that consumers are very pleased to be able to walk into Coles and Woolworths, and in fact I understand in a country town not far from the Sunshine Coast hinterland, 2 litres of milk is now being sold for $1.87 as a lost leader as well. But I think that it's unfortunate when producers when producers are disadvantaged in this way, and it's only a matter of time, despite what Coles and Woolworths are saying, until dairy farmers are being asked to subsidise this price war. I think it's important to recognise that dairy farmers are very important members of our community. They're people who contribute to their local community, and I think that it's unfortunate when they are the victim of this kind of pricing, because ultimately our health as a community will be much reduced if we don't have a viable dairy industry, and my concern is that by the artificial pushing down of the price of milk in Coles and Woolworths, that will, in the longer term, despite what Coles and Woolworths say, that will ultimately push down the price being received by milk producers to an unsustainable level, and many of these milk producers will be unable to remain in that particular industry, and our community as a whole would be the poorer for the fact that we wouldn't have local milk producers able to produce milk for their local communities. On the Sunshine Coast, we've got a number of local milk producers, obviously many dairy farmers, but Ross Hopper and Mullaney Dairies do a wonderful job of producing very high quality milk, and people are prepared to pay a good price because of the very high quality of what Mullaney Dairies produces. And so while I can understand that consumers enjoy being able to buy milk at the prices currently currently being sold at Coles and Woolworths, I do have a concern that in the longer term dairy farmers will be made to pay the price for this price war, and if we lose dairy farmers from the industry, then I don't believe that is an appropriate way to go. Mr Deputy Speaker, I now turn to the need for major infrastructure on the Sunshine Coast, and in particular the need to accelerate the building of the Sunshine Coast University Hospital, which has been delayed by the Queensland Labor Government. And given the growth of this community, given the fact that the State Labor Government has now taken out of the hands of the Sunshine Coast Council planning authority for the Caloundra South development, which will have more than 40,000 new people, and also the Palmview development, which will have something like 16,000 new people. Clearly, if we are going to have this dramatically increased population on the Sunshine Coast, we do need vital infrastructure, including the Sunshine Coast University Hospital, and we also need to upgrade the Bruce Highway to 6 lanes all the way from Caboolture to the Sunshine Coast. When we were in government, Mr Deputy Speaker, you would be aware that we were able to obtain funding from the Howard government to upgrade the Bruce Highway to 6 lanes from Brisbane to the Sunshine Coast, and that removed the worst bottleneck at that time between Brisbane and the Sunshine Coast. But as you would be aware, Mr Second Deputy Speaker, given the fact that you regularly visit the Sunshine Coast, you would be aware that over the years the traffic volumes on the Bruce Highway have continued to grow, and the amount of time that it takes to get from the capital city to and from the Sunshine Coast now is increasingly unacceptable. We really need to make sure that the Sunshine Coast University Hospital is accelerated in its construction because given the fact that many people move from southern parts of Australia to the Sunbelt, the Sunshine Coast, at a stage in their lives when they have increasing health needs, it is important to make sure that the Sunshine Coast University Hospital is built as quickly as possible so that people who do need medical and hospital services are able to access those services on the Sunshine Coast without having to travel to Brisbane to go to the large hospitals there. The Nambour Hospital is a wonderful hospital, the Caloundra Hospital is very good, but ultimately with the growth in our population, the facilities that are there are simply not enough to meet the needs of a growing population. Mr Deputy Speaker, it is important around where the university hospital is going to be constructed that there should be a precinct, there should be a medical precinct, and of course in that area there should be a technology precinct, because those precincts would obviously add to the presence of the university hospital as well as creating employment. And employment is one of the major problems that we do have on the Sunshine Coast, because while we have lots of young families, in addition to lots of retirees living on the Sunshine Coast, unfortunately, when young people leave school or tertiary education, we don't have anywhere near enough jobs on the Sunshine Coast. And so the university hospital, a technology precinct, a medical precinct, high-tech industries around that area, in much the same way as we see in some parts of Taiwan, would greatly advantage the local community, greatly advantage local young people, and in fact would benefit the state of Queensland as a whole. I just think that it's really important that the federal government look at supporting the Queensland government with respect to the Sunshine Coast University Hospital. I think people are sick and tired of the blame game, of the buck being passed back and forth, and I just believe that the sooner we have the Sunshine Coast University Hospital constructed, the better our community will be, and of course that will also remove pressure from the transport of people who have to travel from the Sunshine Coast to Brisbane. It will reduce the pressure on those facilities, because people on the Sunshine Coast will be able to be treated locally rather than having to travel to the capital city. But getting back once again, the final point that I want to make, Mr Deputy Speaker, is I would like to see the government accelerate the upgrading of the Bruce Highway from 4 lanes to 6 lanes, all the way from Caboolture to the Sunshine Coast. I was very concerned when I read that the government intended to cut funding from the Bruce Highway upgrade to enable the government to make its contribution, or part of its contribution, towards flood reconstruction. And while everyone supports flood reconstruction, it ought not to be at the cost of upgrading the Bruce Highway. If the government was a sound economic manager, it wouldn't need the levy. It would have the money, of course, for the restoration after the floods, and also would have the money to upgrade the Bruce Highway to 6 lanes. So I call on the government to upgrade the highway from Caboolture to the Sunshine Coast to 6 lanes urgently. Thank you.
Order.